The sun came up bright over London on the big day. It was May 6, 2023, and everyone in the city was ready for King Charles's coronation. But inside the walls of Kensington Palace, Prince William and Princess Kate had their hands full getting 3 young children ready for one of the biggest royal events of their lifetime. William stood in front of a tall mirror. He wore his red military uniform with shiny medals across his chest. His face looked serious. Today his father would become king, and William would move one step closer to his own future as king someday. He took a deep breath and fixed his collar one more time. In another room, Princess Kate helped their youngest child, Prince Louis, who was only 5 years old. "Stand still for just one more minute," she said with a smile as she straightened his little blue suit. Louis bounced on his toes, too excited to stay in one place. "Will there be a big crown?" Louis asked, his eyes wide. "And horses?" "Daddy said there would be soldiers on horses." Kate laughed and smoothed his hair down. "Yes, there will be all of that and more. But remember what we talked about. This is a quiet ceremony in some parts. You'll need to be on your best behavior." Louis nodded, but Kate knew her youngest son might find it hard to sit still for hours. She slipped a small toy into his pocket, just in case. 8-year-old Princess Charlotte walked in, already dressed in her white outfit with a small silver headpiece in her hair. Unlike her little brother, Charlotte understood the importance of the day. "Money, does my headpiece look like yours?" she asked, standing tall and trying to copy her mother's perfect posture. "You look beautiful," Kate said, fixing a small strand of Charlotte's hair, "just like a proper princess." Prince George, at 10 years old, the oldest of the 3 children, knocked on the door. He was already dressed in his suit with a blue tie. His face looked serious, almost like a smaller copy of his father. "Dad says we need to leave in 20 minutes, George said. As future king after William, George seemed to feel the weight of the day more than his siblings. Kate noticed his nervous look and went to him. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly. "There will be so many people watching," George said. "What if I make a mistake?" William walked in just then and heard his son's worry. He knelt down to look George in the eyes. "I felt the same way when I was your age," William said. "Just remember, we're family first. We'll all be together." The palace staff moved around them, checking last details. Outside, they could hear the crowds already gathering along the streets of London. Millions of people would be watching on TV around the world. Kate gathered all 3 children in the grand room with its high ceilings and old paintings of royal family members from long ago. The children stood in a line as a palace worker took photos. "Remember," William said to his family, "today is about Grandpa. This is his big day that he's waited many years for. We're there to support him." A palace worker knocked on the door. "Your Royal Highnesses, the cars are ready." William looked at Kate, and they shared a special look that said so much without words. They had met as young college students, and now here they were, raising the next generation of the royal family. "Ready?" William asked his family. The 3 children nodded, and even little Louis stood up straight. "Then let's go make some history," William said, taking Kate's hand as they walked toward the door. The future of the royal family was about to step out into the bright spring sunshine, ready to witness a ceremony that had been part of British history for 1,000 years. The royal family walked out of the palace doors into the bright morning light. 4 shiny black cars waited for them in a line. People with earpieces and serious faces stood nearby, making sure everything was safe. "Look at all the people," Louis said, pointing at the crowd gathered at the palace gates. Hundreds of people were there, waving flags and taking pictures with their phones. Kate held Louis's hand tight. "Wave to them," she said with a smile. Louis gave a big wave with his free hand, and the crowd cheered louder. The palace worker opened the car door. William helped George and Charlotte into the back seat first. Then he lifted Louis up and set him on the special child seat. Kate slid in next to them, checking that everyone had their seatbelts on. William got in last and nodded to the driver. As their car rolled down the palace driveway, William looked at his family. He felt proud but also nervous. This was the first big royal event where all three children would be in the public eye for hours. He wondered how little Louis would handle it all. "Remember what I told you about today?" Kate said to the children as the car turned onto the London streets. "There will be a lot of waiting and sitting still. If you get tired or need something, just whisper to me or Daddy." The car windows were made so people outside could see in, but not clearly. Still, the children could see the huge crowds lining every street. People stood 10 deep in some places, all trying to get a look at the royal family driving by. "There are more people than at my school play," Charlotte said, her eyes wide as she looked out the window. George sat up very straight. "Dad, will I have a coronation someday too?" he asked quietly. William looked at his son. It was a big question from a young boy. "Yes, someday, but not for a very long time," he answered honestly. "First Grandpa, then me, and then many years later, you." George nodded seriously, like he was trying to picture that far-off day. Louis pressed his face against the car window. "Look, horses," he shouted as they passed royal guards on horseback. The horses wore special red and gold covers, and the guards sat very tall in their seats. As they got closer to Westminster Abbey, the crowds grew even bigger. People cheered and took pictures as the royal cars drove slowly past. Some held signs that said, "God save the King," or "We love the royal family." Inside the car, Kate helped the children fix their clothes one more time. She smoothed Charlotte's dress and straightened Louis's tie. George fixed his own hair without being asked. "We're almost there," William said as the grand towers of Westminster Abbey came into view. The huge church had stood for almost 1,000 years. Kings and queens had been crowned there since 1066. "It's so big," Louis whispered, looking up at the tall stone building. The car stopped at the entrance to the Abbey. Outside, cameras flashed and reporters spoke quickly into microphones. The world was watching and waiting for them. "Remember," Kate said one last time, "walk slowly, smile, and stay close to us." William got out of the car first. He buttoned his coat and stood tall before reaching back to help Kate out. She stepped out gracefully in her white dress and hat. Then William helped each child out of the car. The family stood together for a moment at the bottom of the steps. Above them, the great doors of Westminster Abbey were open, waiting. Inside was all the pomp and ceremony of a tradition that went back hundreds of years. William took Kate's hand on one side, and George's on the other. Kate held Charlotte's hand, and Charlotte held Louis. Together, they began to walk up the steps toward the Abbey doors. "Here we go," William said quietly to his family. "Just be yourselves." And with that, the future king, his wife, and their 3 children stepped into the grand abbey where history was about to be made. Inside Westminster Abbey, the Wales family walked slowly down the long center aisle. The huge church was filled with over 2,000 guests from around the world. Kings, queens, presidents, and famous people sat in rows of wooden seats. Everyone turned to look as William, Kate, and their children passed by. Louis held tight to Kate's hand, his eyes wide as he looked up at the high ceiling. The abbey was so tall that his neck hurt from looking up. Colorful light came through the big stained glass windows and made patterns on the stone floor. "It's like a castle in a storybook," Charlotte whispered to her mother. Kate smiled and nodded. George walked next to his father, trying to copy William's straight back and steady pace. The boy noticed how people bowed their heads slightly as his father passed. One day, they would bow to him too. The thought made his stomach feel funny. A man in a fancy uniform showed them to their seats in the front row. These special chairs had red cushions and were more comfortable than the wooden seats where most guests sat. The family sat down in order. William, then George, Charlotte, Kate, and Louis at the end. "When will Grandpa come?" Louis asked, a bit too loudly. A few people nearby smiled. "Soon," Kate whispered. "Remember to use your quiet voice." Across the aisle, They could see Queen Camilla's family sitting in their own row. Behind them sat many cousins, aunts, and uncles from the royal family. William nodded politely to his relatives. Suddenly, music filled the abbey. A large choir of men and boys in red and white robes began to sing. Their voices were clear and beautiful as they echoed off the stone walls. Louis's mouth dropped open in surprise at the powerful sound. "The music means it's starting," William explained quietly to his children. Everyone stood up as the song changed. The great doors at the back of the abbey opened wide. King Charles walked in slowly, wearing a heavy red robe with white fur trim. It was so long that 4 helpers had to carry the end of it. On his head was a simple golden band, not the crown yet. George watched his grandfather with serious eyes. "He looks nervous," he whispered to his father. William nodded. "It's a big day for him. He's waited a very long time for this." The king walked past his family without stopping, but he gave them a small smile. Louis waved at his grandfather, even though Kate had told him not to. Charles's eyes crinkled with hidden laughter when he saw his youngest grandson waving. The ceremony was very old and followed rules from hundreds of years ago. A man with a loud voice read from a big book. The choir sang more songs. The archbishop, an old man in golden robes, asked the king to make promises to the people. After 30 minutes, Charlotte began to shift in her seat. Kate gently touched her arm to remind her to sit still. Louis had already started to swing his legs back and forth under his chair. William watched his father closely. He knew every step of this ceremony, because someday it would be his turn. When the holy oil was placed on Charles's head, William felt a strange feeling in his chest. Pride mixed with the heavy weight of what his own future held. The most important moment was coming. Servants brought out the crown of Street Edward on a red pillow. This crown was very old and very heavy, made of solid gold with precious stones. The archbishop lifted it high so everyone could see. Kate leaned down to whisper to her children, "Watch carefully now. This is the moment Grandpa truly becomes king." The 3 children sat up straight, their eyes fixed on their grandfather. Even Louis stopped fidgeting. The abbey went completely quiet. Everyone held their breath as the archbishop slowly lowered the ancient crown onto King Charles's head. And in that moment, history changed. The Wales family watched as Charles officially became king, and the line of succession moved forward one step. The crown sat heavy on King Charles's head. He sat very still on the old wooden throne that had been used for hundreds of years. The abbey was quiet for a moment, and then a great cheer filled the huge space. "God save the king." People called out. The sound was so loud that Louis covered his ears. William felt a lump in his throat as he looked at his father, now officially the king. This was a moment he had known would come, but seeing it happen made it real in a new way. Kate reached across Charlotte to squeeze his hand quickly. The ceremony continued with more prayers and songs. Louis began to get restless. He whispered something to Kate, who shook her head no. Then he tried to climb onto her lap. Kate quietly reminded him that he needed to sit in his own chair during the important parts. George and Charlotte sat perfectly still, but Charlotte's feet had stopped swinging. She was getting tired too. The ceremony was already 2 hours long, and there was still more to go. "How much longer?" Charlotte whispered to her mother. "Not too much," Kate whispered back with an encouraging smile. She reached into her small purse and secretly passed Charlotte a mint candy. Charlotte took it with a grateful look. William noticed Louis was starting to squirm more and more. The little boy's face showed he was trying hard to be good, but it was difficult for any 5-year-old to sit still for so long. William caught Louis's eye and made a funny face when no one was looking. Louis put his hand over his mouth to stop from laughing out loud. After the crown ceremony, King Charles moved to a different throne. This one was even more fancy, with gold decorations and red cushions. One by one, important people came forward to kneel before the king and promise to serve him. When it was William's turn, he stood up from his seat. All three children watched with wide eyes as their father walked to the throne. William knelt before King Charles and placed his hands between his father's hands. I, William, Prince of Wales, do become your liege man of life and limb, and of earthly worship, and faith and truth I will bear unto you, to live and die, against all manner of folks. So help me God, William said in a clear, strong voice. Then William did something that wasn't part of the official ceremony. He leaned forward and kissed his father on the cheek. It was a son's love showing through all the royal rules. King Charles's eyes shined with emotion for a quick moment. As William walked back to his seat, George watched his father closely. Someday, he would make the same promise to his father. And someday, much further in the future, his own children would make that promise to him. The ceremony moved to its final parts. The choir sang more songs, and the archbishop said the last prayers. Louis had finally given up trying to sit still and was now leaning against Kate, his head resting on her arm. His eyes were heavy, but he fought to keep them open. Is it almost done? He asked Kate in a voice that was a bit too loud. Several people nearby smiled at the honest question from the young prince. Almost, Kate whispered. You're doing very well. Charlotte sat up straight again, trying to look as proper as possible even though she was tired. Next to her, George remained perfectly still, watching everything with serious eyes. Finally, after nearly 3 hours, the ceremony was coming to its end. King Charles stood up, the heavy crown still on his head, and began to walk slowly back down the main aisle. As he passed the row where his family sat, he gave them a small nod. William and his family stood with everyone else as the king walked by. Louis, suddenly finding new energy, waved again at his grandfather. This time, Charles allowed himself a small smile and a quick wink at his youngest grandson. Now we follow, William said quietly to his family as King Charles reached the end of the aisle. Stay together and walk slowly. The Wales family stepped out from their row to join the procession behind the king. They would walk out of the abbey and into the bright London day, where thousands of people were waiting to see the newly crowned king and his family. As the Wales family left Westminster Abbey, bright sunlight hit their faces. After hours inside the dark church, the light made them blink. Outside, the noise was much louder than inside. Thousands of people cheered and clapped when they saw the royal family. Wave to the people, Kate reminded the children softly. All three children lifted their hands and waved. The crowd cheered even louder. Photographers with big cameras took hundreds of pictures. The clicks and flashes surrounded the family as they walked down the stone steps of the abbey. William kept a protective hand on George's shoulder. Kate held Louis's hand tight so he wouldn't run off in excitement. Stand here for a moment, a palace worker told them quietly. The family stopped on the middle of the steps for the official photos. This was an important moment that would be in history books someday. Smile, William said to his children through his own smile. George and Charlotte knew how to pose for official photos, but Louis was still learning. He made a big grin that showed all his teeth, making some people in the crowd laugh. After the photos, the family walked to their waiting car. More royal family members came out of the abbey behind them. The car door opened, and William helped the children inside. Once they were all seated, the door closed with a solid thud that blocked out some of the noise. You all did very well, Kate said proudly as the car began to move. Especially you, Louis. That was a long ceremony for someone your age. Louis beamed at his mother's praise. My legs got very tired, he said, and my bottom hurt from sitting so long. William laughed. Mine too, he admitted. Charlotte giggled at her father saying such a thing. The car joined a long line of cars and horses in the coronation parade. Police officers on motorcycles led the way. Behind them came soldiers marching in perfect lines, bands playing music, and then the royal carriages. King Charles and Queen Camilla rode in the gold state coach. This coach was very old and covered in gold. 8 horses pulled it slowly through the streets. William pointed it out to the children as their car followed behind. "That coach is over 260 years old," he told them. "Every king and queen has ridden in it since George II. "Will you ride in it someday, Daddy?" Charlotte asked. William nodded. "Yes, and many years after that, George will too." George looked thoughtful at this. The idea of being king someday still felt strange to him. As they drove through London, the streets were packed with people. Some had camped out all night to get a good spot. They waved flags, took pictures, and cheered as the royal family passed by. Many people wore paper crowns or funny hats with the British flag on them. "Look at that man," Louis said, pointing at someone dressed as a king with a fake beard like King Charles. "He looks like Grandpa." The parade route was over 2 miles long. It went from Westminster Abbey, past many famous London buildings, and back to Buckingham Palace. Rain had been predicted, but the sky stayed blue with just a few clouds. Inside the car, the children began to relax now that the hardest part of the day was over. Charlotte asked for a drink of water. Kate had packed small bottles for everyone. Louis took big gulps from his bottle. "Are you proud of Grandpa?" Kate asked the children as they drove. "Yes," Charlotte said. "He looked very handsome in his crown." "He looked a bit nervous too," George added. "I saw his hands shaking a little when he held the scepter." William looked impressed by his son's observation. "You're right, George. Even kings get nervous on big days. I can't wait to see the balcony." Louis said, changing the subject, "Will there be airplanes again like at the Queen's party?" "Yes," William said with a smile. "There will be a big fly past with lots of airplanes. But first we have to get to the palace." The car turned onto the Mall, the wide road that led straight to Buckingham Palace. The famous building came into view ahead of them, its flag flying high to show the king was now officially crowned. "We're almost there," Kate said. "And then comes the most exciting part." The car carrying the Wales family pulled up to Buckingham Palace. The big iron gates opened to let them in. Guards in red coats and tall black furry hats stood at attention as they passed. Louis waved at them, but the guards didn't wave back. They never smiled or waved while on duty. "Why don't they wave back?" Louis asked, a bit sad. "It's their job to stand very still," William explained. "But I bet they're smiling inside." The car stopped at the side entrance of the palace. Helpers opened the doors, and the family stepped out. Inside the palace, it was much quieter than outside. The thick walls kept out the noise of the crowds. "Can we have lunch now?" Charlotte asked. "I'm very hungry." "Yes," Kate said. "There's a special lunch for everyone in the royal family and important guests." They walked through long hallways with red carpets. The walls were covered with paintings of kings and queens from long ago. Fancy tables held old vases and silver things. Staff members bowed or curtsied as the family passed by. "Your Royal Highnesses," a woman in a black suit greeted them. "The lunch is being served in the state dining room. The king and queen will join shortly." The dining room was huge, with a long table that could fit 40 people. Crystal glasses and gold plates were set at each place. Flowers in the colors of the British flag, red, white, and blue, stood in the middle of the table. The children found their seats, marked with fancy name cards. William helped Louis into his chair, which had a special cushion to help him reach the table. Other royal family members and important guests came in and took their seats too. "Remember your manners," Kate whispered to the children. They all sat up straight and put their napkins on their laps just as they had been taught. The meal was served by men and women in black and white uniforms. They brought soup first, then fish, then chicken with vegetables. For dessert, there was a special coronation trifle with layers of jelly, custard, and cake. Louis's eyes went wide when he saw the colorful dessert. During lunch, William talked with other grown-ups while keeping an eye on his children. George listened carefully to the conversations around him. Charlotte chatted politely with her cousin who sat next to her. Louis worked hard on using his fork and knife correctly. When King Charles and Queen Camilla entered the room, everyone stood up. The king was no longer wearing the heavy crown that was back in its safe place in the Tower of London. Instead, he wore a smaller crown called the imperial state crown. The king walked around the table, speaking briefly to each guest. When he reached his grandchildren, his serious face broke into a warm smile. "And how did you find the ceremony?" he asked them. "It was very long, Grandpa," Louis said honestly. The adults around the table tried not to laugh. "Indeed it was," the king agreed with a wink. "Even for me." Charlotte spoke next. "Your crown is beautiful," she said politely. "Thank you, my dear," the king replied. "It's rather heavy, though." George, always thinking of history, asked, "How did it feel to sit in Street Edward's chair, Grandpa, knowing all the kings and queens before you sat there too?" The king looked impressed by the question. "Very humbling," he answered, "and a bit uncomfortable, if I'm honest. That chair is over 700 years old and feels every bit of it." After lunch, there was a short break before the next big event. The family went to a private room to rest for a while. Louis curled up on a couch and quickly fell asleep. The ceremony and excitement had worn him out. Kate sat next to Louis, gently stroking his hair as he slept. Charlotte looked through a picture book about coronations that someone had given her as a gift. George stood by the window with his father, watching as more and more people gathered outside the palace. "There are thousands of them," George said, amazed by the huge crowd. William nodded. "They've come from all over the country, and even from other countries, just for today." "Just to see Grandpa?" George asked. "To see the king," William corrected gently. "And to be part of history. Soon we'll go out on the balcony so they can see all of us too." A palace worker knocked softly on the door. "Your Royal Highnesses," she said, "it's almost time for the balcony appearance." And they're ready to wake Prince Louis now. William and Kate shared a look. Now came the moment everyone had been waiting for, the famous balcony scene that would be shown on televisions around the world. Kate gently woke Louis up from his short nap. "Time to wake up, sweetheart," she said softly. "We need to go to the balcony now." Louis rubbed his eyes and yawned. His hair was a bit messy from sleeping. Kate quickly fixed it with her hand. Charlotte helped by straightening Louis's little tie. "Are the airplanes coming now?" Louis asked, suddenly wide awake. The fly past was his favorite part. "Yes," William said, "but first we all need to look our best. This is the picture everyone will remember." A group of palace workers helped the family get ready. They brushed lint off William's uniform, fixed a wrinkle in Charlotte's dress, and made sure George's medal was straight. Kate checked her hat in a mirror. "Remember," William told the children, "when we're on the balcony, stand still and wave sometimes. Smile for the cameras and the people." "Will there be very many people?" Charlotte asked. "Thousands," William answered, "and millions more watching on TV." They walked through more palace hallways to reach the room behind the famous balcony. King Charles and Queen Camilla were already there, talking with some palace officials. When they saw William and the children, they smiled. "Ready for the big moment?" the king asked his family. Louis nodded excitedly. "I've been practicing my wave," he said, showing off a royal wave with his hand. Everyone laughed. They could hear the huge crowd outside the palace. The sound of thousands of people cheering was like the roar of the ocean. Palace workers opened the tall glass doors that led to the balcony. King Charles and Queen Camilla stepped out first. The cheers grew even louder. Then William and Kate followed with the three children. The balcony was not very big, so they stood close together. The view from the balcony was amazing. The mall, the wide road leading to the palace, was packed with people as far as they could see. Many people waved British flags. Some held up signs saying, "God save the King," or "We love you, King Charles." "Wave," Kate reminded the children quietly. All three children waved to the crowd. The people below waved back and cheered even more. Cameras clicked as photographers took hundreds of pictures of this historic moment. Louis looked up at the sky. "Where are the planes?" he asked, loud enough for people nearby to hear. "They're coming soon," William told him. "Just a few more minutes." The king stood in the middle of the balcony with his family around him. It was a powerful picture of the present and future of the royal family. The new king, the future king in William, and the future king after that in little George. "Look," Charlotte said suddenly, pointing to the sky. In the distance, they could see the first airplanes coming. They flew in perfect formation, leaving trails of red, white, and blue smoke behind them. Louis jumped up and down with excitement. "They're coming. They're coming," he shouted. Kate put a hand on his shoulder to remind him to be a bit calmer, but she was smiling at his joy. More planes flew overhead in different formations. The crowd cheered with each new group. Then came the fighter jets, flying so fast and so low that the noise was very loud. Louis covered his ears, but kept a big smile on his face. Last of all came the Red Arrows, the special flying team known for their amazing air shows. They zoomed over Buckingham Palace, leaving perfect lines of red, white, and blue smoke in the sky that formed the British flag. The crowd went wild with cheers. Even the adults on the balcony looked impressed. King Charles put his arm around Queen Camilla as they watched. William noticed George staring at the sky with wonder. "What are you thinking?" he asked his son quietly. "I'm thinking that Gan would have loved this," George said, using his special name for his great-grandmother, the late Queen Elizabeth. William felt a lump in his throat. "Yes," he said softly, "she would have." When the last plane disappeared, the family stayed on the balcony for a few minutes more. They waved one final time to the crowds below. Then, following the king and queen, they walked back inside the palace. The glass doors closed behind them. The public part of the day was over. Now they could finally relax away from the cameras and the crowds. "You were all wonderful," Kate told the children. "Perfect royal children." Louis tugged on his collar. "Can I take this off now?" he asked hopefully. William laughed. "Yes, the formal part is over. Now we can be just family again." Back in their private rooms in the palace, the family could finally relax. Staff members helped the children change out of their formal clothes into more comfortable ones. Louis was especially happy to take off his tight shoes and put on soft play shoes instead. William changed from his heavy military uniform into a simple dark suit. Kate kept her dress on but took off her hat and some of her jewelry. She let her long hair down from its tight style. "Can we have cake now?" Louis asked. During the lunch, he had seen a huge cake with the king's picture on it, but they hadn't cut it yet. "Yes, there will be cake at the family tea," Kate said, "but first we have a little time to rest." The children played quietly in the sitting room. George and Charlotte built a card house together, while Louis drove a small toy car on the carpet. William and Kate sat on a couch nearby, finally having a moment to talk. "They did so well today," Kate said, watching their children play. "Even Louis." William nodded. "Better than I did at my first big royal event. I remember being terrified at my father's wedding to Camilla." "George is becoming more aware of his future," Kate said softly, so the children wouldn't hear. "Did you see how closely he watched everything your father did?" "Yes," William sighed. "I wish he could just be a child without thinking of all that yet." A knock on the door interrupted their talk. A palace worker came in with a tray of tea and small sandwiches. "The king wondered if you might like some refreshments before the family gathering," she said. The children quickly abandoned their games when they saw the food. They sat around a small table and ate tiny sandwiches with the crusts cut off. There were cucumber sandwiches, egg sandwiches, and ham sandwiches. Louis ate 3 ham ones in a row. "Slow down," Kate reminded him gently. "There's plenty of food." After tea, it was time for the family-only part of the day. They walked to a large room where other royal family members were gathering. This was a private party with no cameras or strangers allowed. The room was filled with cousins, aunts, uncles, and family friends. Some had traveled from other countries just for today. As soon as they entered, the children spotted their cousins and ran off to play. King Charles sat in a comfortable chair, looking more relaxed than he had all day. The heavy crown was put away, and he wore only a simple gold band on his head now. He was eating a piece of that special cake Louis had noticed earlier. William got drinks for himself and Kate. Then they moved around the room, talking with relatives they hadn't seen in a long time. From across the room, they kept an eye on their children. George was talking with his older cousins, looking very grown up. Charlotte was showing her dress to her little cousins, spinning around to make it flare out. Louis was running around with a cousin his own age, both of them laughing. "Your children were wonderful today," William's cousin Zora told him. "Louis is such a character." William smiled proudly. They'd been practicing for weeks. Kate made sure they knew exactly what to expect. The party went on for several hours. As evening came, the younger children started to get tired again. Louis sat on his grandfather's lap, listening to a story about when King Charles was a little boy. "Were you scared at your mother's coronation?" Louis asked the king. "A bit," the king admitted. "I was only 4 years old, even younger than you are now." "I wasn't scared," Louis said proudly. "Just a little bored sometimes." The adults laughed at his honesty. The king didn't mind. He knew how hard it was for children at big royal events. As the evening went on, the family gathered for pictures, not official ones, but family photos for their private albums. They stood together by the fireplace while someone took pictures with a regular camera. "Smile," the photographer said. In this picture, they weren't royals with duties and rules. They were just a family celebrating a big day together. Louis made a silly face. Charlotte stood perfectly straight. George leaned slightly against his father. William put his arm around Kate's waist. Later, when it was time to go home, the children were all tired. Louis was almost asleep on his feet. William picked him up and carried him to the car. The little boy's head rested heavy on his father's shoulder. As they drove away from the palace, the lights of London glowed around them. It had been a long, historic day, a day their children would remember all their lives. "We did it," Kate said softly to William as the children dozed in the back seat. William reached for her hand and squeezed it. "Yes," he said, "and someday we'll do it again." He didn't need to explain. Kate knew he was thinking of the day, far in the future, when it would be his turn to wear the crown. For now, though, they were just parents taking their tired children home after a very big day. And that was exactly how they wanted it to be. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains of Kensington Palace. It was Sunday, the day after the big coronation. The palace was quiet compared to the busy day before. In the kitchen, Kate was already up, making breakfast for the family. She liked to cook for them on Sundays when they didn't have royal duties. William came in, still in his pajamas and robe. "The children still asleep?" he asked, pouring himself some tea. "Yes," Kate smiled. "I think yesterday tired them out completely." Outside, the world was still talking about the coronation. Newspapers had pictures of the royal family all over their front pages. Many showed the children on the balcony or walking in the abbey. People online were sharing videos of Louis yawning during the ceremony, Charlotte helping her little brother, and George standing tall next to his father. William picked up one of the newspapers on the table. "Look at this," he said, showing Kate a picture of all 5 of them waving from the balcony. The headline said, "The Future of the Monarchy. 3 generations of royals delight the nation." "It's a lovely picture," Kate said. "Everyone looks happy." Soon they heard the sound of small feet running down the hallway. Louis burst into the kitchen in his dinosaur pajamas. "Morning," he said brightly. "Can I have pancakes?" "Yes," Kate laughed. "I'm making them now." Charlotte came in next, her hair still messy from sleep. She was carrying the special headpiece she had worn yesterday. "Can we keep this forever?" she asked. "To remember the day." "Of course," William said. "It's part of history now." George was last to come down. He was already dressed for the day in jeans and a sweater. "Good morning," he said politely. "I heard Grandpa is coming for lunch." William nodded. Yes, he wanted a quiet family day after all the ceremony yesterday. After breakfast, the children played in the garden. The May weather was perfect. Not too hot, not too cold. Louis kicked a small football around. Charlotte picked flowers with Kate. George sat with William on a bench, still asking questions about the coronation and what it meant. Inside the palace, staff members prepared for the king's visit. They set the table in the dining room with the family's everyday plates, not the fancy ones used for official meals. King Charles had asked for a simple family lunch, nothing formal. At noon, a black car pulled up to the private entrance. King Charles stepped out, wearing casual clothes, just trousers and a sweater, no tie. He carried a bag of presents for the children. The children ran to meet their grandfather. "Grandpa!" Louis shouted, throwing his arms around the king's legs. Charles laughed and picked him up for a hug. "Hello, my boy," he said. "Did you sleep well after our big day?" "I slept so long Mummy had to wake me up," Louis told him. Inside, they had a simple lunch of roast chicken, potatoes, and vegetables. There was apple pie for dessert, the king's favorite. They sat around the table talking and laughing like any family having Sunday lunch together. After they ate, Charles gave the children their gifts. For George, there was a special book about the history of coronations. For Charlotte, a small jewelry box that had belonged to Queen Elizabeth. For Louis, a wooden toy soldier wearing the same uniform the king had worn yesterday. "To remember our special day," Charles told them. Later, they all walked in the private gardens. The king held Louis's hand on one side and Charlotte's on the other. William and Kate walked behind with George. From far away, it looked like any grandfather enjoying time with his family. "Yesterday, I was wearing a crown and sitting on a throne," Charles said to William. "But this is what truly matters." William nodded. He understood. Even on the biggest day in royal history, what stayed with them weren't the crowns or ceremonies, but the small moments shared as a family. The way Louis had made everyone laugh with his honest comments. How Charlotte had been so careful to do everything right. How George had watched everything with thoughtful eyes, learning for his future. As the afternoon sun began to lower in the sky, the family walked back toward the palace together. Yesterday's coronation would be in history books forever, but today's simple family time would live in their hearts just as long. The coronation ceremony had been for the world to see, but this quiet afternoon was just for them, a family who happened to be royal, finding their balance between public duty and private joy.